Good evening and welcome to the Shrewsbury Historical Society. This is our December 15th, 2021 presentation. My name is Eric Larson and I'm the president of the Shrewsbury Historical Society. We have our curators and treasurers report at our next meeting in January. Thank you very much. The Shrewsbury Historical Society tonight presents The History of Christmas Carols by Sari, Bitticks, a virtual program and tape rebroadcast. Shrewsbury channels 28 and 328 are available on demand online at www.shrewsburymediaconnection.org. About the program. Everyone loves the old familiar Christmas carols, but some of them do not mean what you think they do. Some are actually calls to rebellion and more. Find out who wrote some of your favorite carols and why others are dangerous to sing. About the presenter tonight. Sari Bitticks is president of the Auburn Historical Society and chair of the Auburn Historical Commission. She enjoys conducting research for accurate, entertaining presentations. Tonight's program will also include an uninterrupted musical presentation of the carols performed on piano by Mark Mummert. Mark is a cantor at Trinity Lutheran Church in Worcester, an associate conductor of the Worcester Chorus. He is on the faculty of the Hanover Theater and Conservatory in Worcester and performs regularly with the Worcester Chamber Music Society. Our next program will be January 26, 2022. The program will be Bathsheba Spooner by author Andrew Noon. And now, here is Sari.
Thank you very much, Eric. I hope you don't mind if I give a little bit of a commercial. Auburn Historical Museum, 41 South Street in Auburn. We're open Tuesdays and Saturdays, 9:30 to 12:30, or by appointment. We have the Winfried Summerfield exhibit right now, which is photographs from the 50s and 60s. A lot of places you'll remember, a lot of old cars. We also have our Civil War uniform and an 1850s shoemaker's bench with all the tools you need to make shoes. So please come and see us. So, carols. Carols never stand alone. They tell a story. They all have history. Many go back to before they were formally written out. And when Christmas was outlawed by the Puritans, carols kept it alive in the hearts of the people. I'm going to start and end this talk with miracles. Our first one is the 1914 World War I Christmas truce. Soldiers from France, Belgium, and Britain were in the trenches fighting the Germans. They dealt with cold, mud, rats, lice, and rain. And it was a stalemate at that point. The trenches were only a few hundred feet apart, and sometimes less. Many soldiers were ill, and many died. On December 17th, the first Christmas of the war, Pope Benedict XV called for a truce, a temporary ceasefire. The Germans agreed, the others didn't. On Christmas, many packages arrived for the Germans. They put candles and Christmas trees on Christmas Eve. They grabbed bushes, trees, anything they could find, stuck them in the dirt, and put candles on them. Hundreds of them along the trenches. The British soldiers were told to watch them carefully, but not to fire on them. The Brits could hear the Germans singing, being merry. Every now and then one would call out, "Happy Christmas, Englishmen." In some places, the two opponents exchanged Christmas carols, each applauding the song of the other. At "O Come All Ye Faithful," the Brits sang in English, the Germans sang it in Latin. Eventually, the soldiers disobeyed their superior officers along 2/3 of the Western Front. That's 450 miles of trenches. And they all came out of their trenches. They sang carols, they exchanged photos of loved ones at home, they shared food, they played soccer, they caught and roasted pigs, and they arranged to warn each other if their officers told them to start firing. And I have an excerpt from a letter by a British soldier, Private Oswald Tilley. They finished their carol, and we thought we ought to retaliate in some way. So we sang the First Noel. And when we finished that, they all began clapping. Then they struck up another favorite of theirs, O Tannenbaum. And so it went on. First the Germans would sing one of their carols, and then we would sing one of ours, until when we started up, O Come All Ye Faithful, the Germans immediately joined in singing the same hymn to Latin words, Adeste Fidelis. And I thought, well, this is really a most extraordinary thing. Two nations both singing the same carol in the middle of a war. This experience has been the most practical demonstration I have seen of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Tilly even empathized with the German soldiers. We hated their guts when they killed one of ours. We really did dislike them intensely. And we thought, well, the poor so-and-sos, they're in the same kind of muck as we are. It doesn't seem right to be killing each other at Christmas time. The High Command of the Brits found out and called the spontaneous peacemaking treasonous and a court-martial offense. It took until March 15th to get them back to fighting. Pity they didn't leave them alone. So a couple of carol terms you might want definitions of. The word carol comes from the Latin carula, a choral song. A carol is a celebratory song with dancing, originally anyway. Usually is a folk song, not written on purpose, evolving from oral traditions. About the 1400s, you started getting intentional carols for various religious holidays. It was a long time before they were written down. In point of fact, Christmas carols are the nearest thing we have to an oral folk tradition covering the whole Western world. The original Christmas songs were in Latin. In the 13th century, that all changed when St. Francis of Assisi started the first nativity plays and nativity scenes using the real animals. And this is when people started singing in their own languages, not in Latin. But starting in the 1500s, the Puritans had other thoughts about it. From the 1640s to the 1650s, Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans banned Christmas, but people kept their carols up in secret. They nearly killed off Christmas in the 16th and 17th century. The Puritans didn't like anything fun or anything papist. In the 13th century, we got Adeste Fidelis, the first carol. In the 15th century, I Saw Three Ships, and I don't care what you say, Henry VIII didn't write it. That's apocryphal. The 19th century is called the Golden Age of Christmas carols. Now, in modern times in England, as many as 150 people will go around singing carols to everybody. And there are huge carol festivals, especially one at the Royal Hotel in Yorkshire. The resurgence of carols came with the rediscovery of the First Noel. Somebody stumbled upon an old manuscript of it and started using it. Then God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. Then I Saw Three Ships. Now Charles Wesley, he was the hymn writer of the Wesley family. He was from 1707 to 1788. In 1739, he wrote Hark the Herald Angels Sing. But some people didn't like the tune, so that was modified later by Felix Mendelssohn. Now, as I'm sure you know, St. Boniface is the one in the 800s who brought the fir trees inside from the old pagan celebrations. And then Prince Albert in 1840 had a Christmas tree in the palace. And everybody thinks that started the Christmas tree, yay. But it didn't. They'd had Christmas trees forever in the palace. But he got his picture taken, and an engraving was put in all the newspapers of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert and the family around the tree. And Queen Victoria in 1837 started promoting everybody singing carols. Some carols' history can be traced through the range of notes. For example, Angels We Have Heard on High was obviously written by the Catholics because it never strays more than one octave. In the refrain, in its verse, there's only 6 notes. It ties it to the chant melody that the monks used to use to teach songs to the congregations before anybody was really literate. Joy to the World in 1719, Isaac Watts, based on Psalm 98. New music was used in 1839 by Lowell Mason. Now, the 12 Days of Christmas. The 12 Days of Christmas is a real thing. That's Christmas Day to January 5th, the day before the Feast of the Epiphany. And it's been celebrated since 370 AD. In 1016, Ethelred said, "The 12 days of Christmas is the time of peace, among all Christians, and all strife must cease. In some places, it was illegal to carry a weapon during the 12 days. It was if you did anything violent, you were locked up for the whole 12 days. And God help you if you committed a crime. So the song became from a memory and forfeit game. You know, like the farmer's cat is a big cat. The farmer's cat is a big black cat. The farmer's cat is a big black cat with one ear. And you keep going until somebody forgets it and they're thrown out, and you go until the last person. And that's what they did with the 12 Days of Christmas. Around 1780 was the first printed mention. It existed, of course, long before that. Now, it probably dates to the 16th century, and it has to be French for you birders, because French partridges are the only ones who roost in pear trees. Other partridges roost in other trees. The game became a song after the details were printed in 1780. But this was a time of religious strife, so they decided it could be a teaching tool for children. So they wrote out a version that became commonly used. One partridge in a pear tree is Jesus. 2 turtle doves, Old and New Testaments. 3 French hens, the 3 theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. 4 calling birds, the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The 5 golden rings, the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. 6 geese a laying, the 6 days of creation. 7 swans a swimming, the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and fear of the Lord. The 8 maids a milking, the 8 beatitudes, blessed are the poor. The 9 ladies dancing, the 9 fruits of the Holy Spirit. Gentleness, goodness, love, joy, peace, long-suffering, faith, meekness, and temperance. The 10 lords a leaping are the 10 commandments. The 11 pipers piping, the 11 faithful apostles. The 12 drummers drumming are the 12 points of the Apostles' Creed. And this was used all over the world for a very long time. The Holly and the Ivy was written about Jesus and his suffering. The white berries are Jesus, the white flowers are Jesus, and the red berries are the Lord's blood. On the other hand, many people thought the Holly and the Ivy was about the battle of the sexes. Hollies are male, ivies are female, because they encompass everything. And there's no definitive answer. Now, this little part is complicated. England was Catholic until Henry VIII. And then when he got going and his followers got going, Christmas was outlawed. The Puritans ruled. Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, tried to regain the throne, and he failed. He fled to France. People wanted him back. They wanted him and then James, I can't remember if it's the second or the third, to rule eventually. And James in Latin is Jacobus, so we have the Jacobites. So Adeste Fidelis, when it was finally printed and set, was a rallying call to like-minded Christians to stand up and be counted. Many scholars have traced some of the history, but they can't get all of it because manuscripts have been destroyed. The story of this carol is intermingled with persecution, injustice, intrigue from the Middle Ages. The words of the hymn are a heartfelt plea for the French to invade England and restore Catholic traditions and end the persecution, and put Bonnie Prince Charlie on the throne. Faithful meant Jacobite. Bethlehem was code for England. There are over 25 different versions of the hymn. They'd stand on a street corner and say, "Oh, come all ye faithful," and there'd be something written on the ground or some symbol behind them, written in charcoal, that tells them where the meeting is. The number of verses was what time the meeting was. And this is how they gathered people to help plan the rebellion, which never happened, but, they tried. Now, Silent Night was recorded more than any other song in history. First performed at the Midnight Mass, Christmas Eve, 1818, St. Nicholas Church, Obendorf, Austria. There was no mouse who chewed a hole in the organ bellows. It was written for the guitar. It was written to be a simple song, and the idea was it could spread to the little parishes who didn't have the money to have an organ. and people could play it at home. Now we come to good King Wenceslas, who was real. He actually existed. He was the Duke of Bohemia. He was born in 907 and died in 935. He was a secret Christian in a pagan land. He would go house to house and make sure everybody had food and fuel. If he found anybody homeless, he would find them a home. He would give money to widows. He would help the sick. He was considered to be the father of all the wretched. There are actually some miracles attributed to him, and many people say he was a saint. Several hundred years later, he was actually called a king. Legally, they made him a king. Unfortunately, he was martyred by his brother, who found out he was a Christian. But he was a real person. Away in a Manger is American, written in 1887. It's said it was adapted from something Martin Luther used to read to his kids, but that was never proven. The Christmas song, Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire, really was written by Mel Torme. The First Noel is one of the oldest Christmas ballads, first in print in 1833. Go Tell It on the Mountain was written by John Wesley Work, an African-American church choir director, and he wrote it around the end of the Civil War. I'll Be Home for Christmas, 1943. With World War II, the soldiers felt this was a very powerful song for them, almost like a prayer. It was written by Kim Gannon of Brooklyn. It was based on the sorrow of thousands of families missing their sons. Her goal was to capture the unsettling scenes that surrounded her, to reflect the heartache of being away from home for the holidays. Bing Crosby recorded it in 1943. The song was very popular in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. God Rest You, Merry Gentlemen was written by peasants in the 15th century, not written by church people. The peasants had a really quiet rebellion. They were rebelling against the tone of church music. It was funereal and kind of depressing. So they did an upbeat melody with joyful words, and they danced to it. At the time, merry meant great and mighty, and rest meant keep or make. So they're out singing, God, keep you merry gentlemen, around rich people's houses, and they threw money and food and drink, and much happiness ensued. Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas was written for Meet Me in St. Louis. The idea of it was a venue for Judy Garland to get over the image of Dorothy and Over the Rainbow and give her something more adult. And it was released in December of 1944 as a single. Now, Judy Garland, toward the end of the war, spent a lot of time with soldiers and with the veterans. She refused to sing the song as it was originally written. She wanted to bring hope to the men, so the writers wrote a more upbeat opening with a more encouraging tone. To Garland, it wasn't a song, it was a prayer. For millions, it was what they wanted to be the truth. They wanted to be home for Christmas. The song always had a special meaning for her, and it was her singing of it that made it a classic. Massachusetts has a lot to do with Christmas carols. In 1849, a Unitarian minister, Dr. Edmund Sears of Wayland, wanted an inspirational poem to cheer up his poverty-stricken congregation. He wrote the poem, It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. It was set to music shortly after the publication. Medford, Mass., 1840. James Pierpont, a musician, was told to write something for a Thanksgiving service. Just do it. And he's wandering around and sees somebody had to set up a sleigh race. And he's watching the horses and the sleighs and the bells, and he's humming a little thing that he's coming up with. And the guy next to him says, hey, that's a nice little jingle you have there. And he was going to call it One Horse Open Sleigh, but they called it Jingle Bells instead. This is a little convoluted, but we get in here. 1847, Placide Capot de Roquemarie, commissioner of wines in a small town in France, was a poet but not a devout man. The pastor asked for a Christmas poem. He finished the poem but thought it needed music. So he went to his friend Okay. Small disaster. There we go. It went to his friend Adolphe Charles Adams, a Jew who wrote the original score. Well, the church leaders found out about that and decided the Cantique de Noël was not going to be sung by anyone. The people adored it in France and sang it all the time. John Sullivan Dwight, a Unitarian minister in Northampton, Massachusetts, had a little problem. Every time he got up to preach, he had a panic attack. So he decided he'd be better off as the music director. Well, he stumbled across the Cantique de Noël and reintroduced it and translated the words into English. Now we come upon Reginald Fesiden, a Canadian inventor. He invented the principle of converting low-frequency sound to high-frequency sounds. He's responsible for the first transmission of speech by radio in 1900 on a closed circuit. He also, in 1906, did the first two-way radio-telegraphic communication across the Atlantic Ocean. The first radio broadcast ever in the history of the world, Christmas Eve, 1906, heard by ships in the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea, and anybody else who had a radio set. People like to eavesdrop on the Morse codes to see if they could pick up any gossip. So, Fesiden had a new generator, which gave him more power. Christmas Eve, 1906, he read the Nativity. Ships at sea heard words for the first time. Then he took his violin and he played the Cantique de Noël and sang the song in English with its English title. My favorite of all the Christmas carols, O Holy Night, was the first song ever played on the radio. Silver Bells, 1951, written for the Lemon Drop Kid. Bob Hope sang it in the movie. Bing Crosby recorded it. Now, Irving Berlin, a great composer, wrote some music in 1938. No, I don't think so. So he shelved it. Well, a few years later, he was asked to write movie for the Holiday Inn movie with Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire. And Berlin had to put in something for Christmas, so he drew on his own experience of the holiday in New York City. Santa, there's people in the sleds in the Central Park, there's a snowman and snowballs and people running around and a little snuggling here and there and kids. So he wrote a song that he thought embodied Christmas. He hated it, and he was going to throw it out. Bing Crosby came into his office, took one look at it, and said, "No, you don't. Not a chance on this earth." And recorded it in 1942. The most popular Christmas carol, White Christmas, was nearly thrown out. And so my last thing I want to tell you all about, and this is the big miracle. There's a man named Bob May who was born in 1905 and died in 1976. In 1938, the Great Depression was winding down. He was a copywriter and an artist from Montgomery Ward. Was a big, it still is, I think, big department store out in Chicago. He had a very bleak outlook for Christmas. His wife, Evelyn, was losing her battle with cancer. His 4-year-old daughter, Barbara, was very sad because she couldn't have anything new because all the money had to go to the mother, and her mother couldn't do anything with her. And her friends always had the mother hanging around. Now, Bob, who'd been kind of a scrawny, sickly little kid, knew what it was like to be bullied by the others and not be very well liked. So he made up a story, and he drew some little pictures for it. And Barbara demanded the story every night. For a Christmas gift, he wrote a booklet for her and drew all the pictures. Sadly, Evelyn died before Christmas came. He gave the book to Barbara, and she liked it very much. He had to go to a holiday party for work. They'd seen the book, some of the people around him, and asked him to read it. He read it, and they gave him a standing ovation, and they wanted copies. The head of Montgomery Ward thought, yeah, we could benefit from the story, And he gave Bob just enough money to pay off his debts and bought the rights to the story. And for 6 years, they gave it out to the customers, starting in 39. 6 million copies they gave out. Then a major publisher said in 1946, I want to publish that story. I think that'll be good. And here's the miracle. The owner of Montgomery Ward's returned the rights to the story to Bob May in 1946. The next year, 1947, Bob May was a rich man. His brother-in-law, Johnny Marks, adapted the story into a song. He said, Bing Crosby, you want to sing this song? No. Dinah Shore, you want to sing this song? No. Well, Gene Autry had had a big hit. Hi, Gene Autry, you want to sing this song? No. Mrs. Gene Autry, on the other hand, said, yeah, he does. He's going to do that. So he recorded it. It became the second best-selling Christmas song of all times, just below White Christmas. With toys, games, records, movies, and TV, Bob May's grandchildren are millionaires. And the song he wrote was, of course, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And that's what I have to tell you about Christmas carols and their history. Some of them got you in trouble, and some of them made you rich. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.